The observation post hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology, its crystalline walls offering a perfect view of the alien landscape below. Kepler 442b stretched endlessly in shades of amber and jade, its twin suns casting long shadows across the untamed wilderness. Within the post's sterile confines, 3 figures monitored holographic displays with the detached interest of scientists studying lab specimens. Commander Zethvar of the collective adjusted his neural interface, the bioluminescent patches along his elongated skull pulsing with concentration. Beside him, research specialist Karathon documented behavioral patterns with mechanical precision, her 6 arms moving in perfect synchronization across multiple data streams. The third observer, junior analyst Velinara, watched with the wide-eyed curiosity of someone on their first xenological expedition. Day 847 of the Human Observation Protocol. Zethvar dictated to the recording device. The colonists continued to exhibit predictable patterns of territorial aggression and resource competition. Their interactions with native fauna remained consistently hostile, confirming our preliminary assessments of their primitive nature. Below them, the human settlement of New Eden buzzed with activity. Prefabricated structures dotted the landscape, like metallic growths connected by worn paths that spoke of routine and purpose. The humans themselves moved with the bustling energy of a species still adapting to their new world. Their faces often turned skyward with a mixture of wonder and wariness. Karathon-S instruments detected movement in the northern quadrant, where the settlement's boundaries met the wild expanse of the Thornwood Forest. Commander, we have an isolated human approaching the restricted zone. Standard protocol suggests we should document typical territorial behavior. The figure on their screens moved with deliberate purpose through the dense undergrowth. Dr. Elena Vasquez, though they didn't know her name yet, carried herself with the confident stride of someone intimately familiar with the dangerous terrain. Her weathered field gear spoke of countless expeditions into the unknown, while the collection of scientific instruments at her belt marked her as something more than a common settler. Fascinating, Velinara whispered, her voice carrying the musical tones of her homeworld. She ventures alone into territory where even their military patrols travel in groups. Either exceptional stupidity or the typical human disregard for survival instincts. Zethvar finished with the certainty of someone who had studied hundreds of species. Their psychological profiles consistently show elevated risk-taking behaviors, particularly in males defending territory or resources. Though this specimen appears to be female, the forest around Elena seemed to pulse with hidden life. Bioluminescent fungi cast an ethereal glow through the canopy, while the calls of unseen creatures echoed through the humid air. The observers noted how she moved not with the aggressive swagger they expected from human documentation, but with something approaching reverence. She paused frequently, not to check for threats, but to examine plant specimens and listen to the forest's subtle rhythms. Her behavior deviates from established patterns, Karathon observed, her analytical mind already processing the implications. Previous subjects showed clear signs of dominance assertion when entering unfamiliar territory. This one exhibits ... curiosity? A deep rumble shook the forest floor, causing the monitoring equipment to register massive displacement in the nearby biomass. The observers leaned forward, their academic interest sharpening into focused attention. Something large was moving through the thornwood, something that made the very ground tremble with its passage. Classification: Thorned Leviathan, Karathon announced, her voice tight with professional concern. Adult specimen, approximately 12 meters in length. Threat level: catastrophic. Previous encounters with human subjects resulted in complete casualties. The massive creature burst through the tree line like a living mountain, its armored hide gleaming with natural weapons that could shred steel. Multiple rows of bone spikes ran along its serpentine body, while its broad head housed jaws capable of crushing a transport vehicle. This was death incarnate, a perfect predator that had dominated Kepler 442b's ecosystem for millions of years. Elena stood directly in its path, small and fragile against the advancing Titan. The observers prepared to document another example of human aggression meeting its inevitable end. Zethver's fingers hovered over the recording controls, ready to capture what would surely be a brief but violent encounter. But the expected attack never came. Instead, something impossible happened, something that would shatter their understanding of both humans and the universe itself. Asterisk. The thorned Leviathan's massive form crashed through the final barrier of undergrowth, its arrival accompanied by the splintering of ancient trees and the panicked flight of smaller creatures. The observers watched through their enhanced sensors as the beast's enormous head swung toward the lone human, expecting to witness the swift and brutal end they had documented 17 times before. Elena Vasquez stood her ground, but not in the defiant stance the aliens had come to associate with human territorial behavior. Instead, she extended her hands in a gesture they had never seen before, open palms, empty of weapons, offered in what could only be described as greeting by the eternal void. Velinara breathed, her young mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. She's not preparing to fight. She's approaching it. The Leviathan's massive head lowered, bringing its house-sized skull to Elena's eye level. Rows of teeth, each longer than Elena's forearm, gleamed in the filtered sunlight. The creature's breathing created small windstorms that should have sent the human tumbling, yet she remained steady, her voice carrying across the distance in soft, melodious tones. There you are, beautiful. Elena's words reached the observation post through their directional audio enhancement. I was wondering when you'd come to check on me. Look at you, you magnificent creature. Kyrathon S instruments went haywire as the Leviathan's massive head moved closer to the human, close enough that its breath must have been overwhelming. Yet Elena reached out with steady hands, placing her palms against the creature's armored snout in a gesture of impossible intimacy. This cannot be accurate, Zethver muttered, his certainty cracking like ice under pressure. Our behavioral models predict 99.7% probability of immediate aggression. The Leviathan species has never shown anything but hostility toward sentient life. The massive creature's response defied every scientific principle they thought they understood. Rather than striking, it pressed its enormous head into Elena's touch, a sound rumbling from its throat that their equipment struggled to classify. It wasn't the territorial roar they had documented, nor the feeding cry that preceded attacks. It was something entirely new, a sound that spoke of recognition, of ... affection. Elena moved around the creature with the familiarity of long practice, her hands exploring its armored hide with professional thoroughness. What happened to you, sweetheart? She murmured, her voice carrying the concern of someone examining a beloved pet. These wounds are fresh. Did you tangle with a spikeback again? I've told you about being more careful. The observers watched in stunned silence as Elena's examination revealed deep gashes along the creature's left flank, wounds that wept a luminescent fluid across its darkened scales. The Leviathan remained perfectly still during her inspection, occasionally shifting its massive bulk to give her better access to the injuries. She's conducting a medical examination, Kyrathon reported, her voice hollow with disbelief. The creature eye sits, cooperating, voluntarily. Elena retrieved a field medical kit from her pack, the same standard equipment every colonist carried for emergency treatment. But instead of using it on herself, she began cleaning the Leviathans. Wounds with gentle efficiency. The creature's massive eye easily, the size of Elena's torso, watched her work with an intelligence that sent chills through the observing scientists. The neural activity readings are extraordinary, Velinara whispered, her instruments detecting patterns of brain function that challenge their understanding of the species. It's not just passive submission. There's active cognitive engagement, problem-solving responses, even what appears to be emotional processing. The Leviathan's great head turned toward Elena as she worked, and impossibly, what could only be described as a purring sound emerged from its throat. The vibration was so deep it registered on their seismic monitors, yet Elena seemed to find it soothing, her own voice joining in a wordless harmony that spoke of communication beyond language. Dr. Vasquez, she said to herself, using the name. The observers would later learn. That's enough antiseptic for now. You're being very brave, but I know it stings. She patted the creature's flank with the casual affection someone might show a domestic animal. Let me get you something for the pain. From her pack, Elena produced a collection of native fruits, each one carefully selected and prepared. The observers recognized them as highly toxic specimens that would kill a human within minutes. Yet Elena offered them to the Leviathan with the confidence of someone who had done this countless times before. The creature accepted the offering with delicate movements that belied its massive size, its razor-sharp teeth carefully avoiding Elena's fingers as it fed from her hands. The scene was so far beyond their expectations that Zethver found himself questioning the fundamental assumptions that had guided his entire career. Commander, Kyrathon's voice carried a tremor of uncertainty. We need to expand our research parameters. Everything we thought we knew about human-native interaction patterns, it's all wrong. As Elena continued her ministrations, the Leviathan settled into a more comfortable position, its massive form creating a natural amphitheater around the tiny human. The sight of this apex predator, the most feared creature on Kepler 442b, accepting care from a being it could crush without effort, represented a paradigm shift that would echo through the collective's understanding of life itself. The bond they were witnessing transcended species, transcended evolution, transcended every scientific principle they had held sacred. And as Elena began to sing a soft, wordless melody that seemed to calm the great beast, the observers realized they were witnessing something that would change not just their mission, but their entire worldview. Over the following days, the collective observers expanded their surveillance network, driven by a scientific curiosity that bordered on obsession. What they discovered challenged not just their understanding of humans, but the very foundations of xenobiology itself. Elena's daily routine defied every behavioral model in their databases. Each morning, she would venture into different sections of the phone wood, carrying supplies that seemed inadequate for survival in such a hostile environment. Yet she moved through the dangerous terrain with the confidence of someone walking through a well-tended garden. Target approaching grid section Theta 7, Kyrathon announced, tracking Elena's movement through the dense canopy. Historically, this area has shown the highest concentration of predator activity. Human survival probability, negligible. Velinara, who had become increasingly invested in Elena's welfare, watched with growing anxiety as the human approached a clearing where their sensors detected massive life signs. Commander, shouldn't we intervene? Our prime directive prohibits interference, but surely we observe, Zethver replied firmly, though his own certainty had been steadily eroding. Whatever happens, we document. The clearing Elena entered was unlike anything in their xenobiological surveys. Ancient trees formed a natural cathedral, their intertwined branches creating a canopy so dense that the area existed in permanent twilight. Bioluminescent moss carpeted the ground, while pools of crystal-clear water reflected the ethereal glow of native flora. But it was the inhabitants that left the observers speechless. A pack of razor wolves, creatures whose pack-hunting strategies had decimated early human settlements, approached Elena with the eager anticipation of domestic animals greeting their owner. Their metallic fur caught the filtered light as they pressed against her legs, their razor-sharp claws carefully sheathed. As they sought her attention, "Impossible," Sethvar breathed, his scientific worldview crumbling with each passing moment. Razor wolves are incapable of forming bonds with other species. They are genetically programmed for aggression. Elena moved among the pack with easy familiarity, scratching behind their ears and speaking to each one by name. "Hello, Mercury." "Yes, I missed you too, Silverblade." "Where's Shardtooth? Still sulking about the bath?" From the shadows emerged a creature that sent alarm signals through every monitoring system. A crystal-backed stalker, its translucent hide rippling with internal light, padded silently toward Elena. These ambush predators were responsible for more human deaths than any other species, their ability to bend light making them nearly invisible. Until they struck. Yet this one nuzzled against Elena's shoulder with obvious affection. Its deadly claws retracted as it purred with contentment. Elena responded by producing a chunk of processed meat from her pack, offering it with the casual ease of someone feeding a house cat. Her supply inventory shows she's carrying enough food for dozens of large carnivores, Kyrathon reported, her voice tight with disbelief. "This isn't a research expedition. It's a feeding run." The full scope of Elena's sanctuary gradually revealed itself as more creatures emerged from the undergrowth. A family of thorn-scale herbivores, their armor-plated forms glinting in the dappled light, approached with their young trailing behind. These creatures were known for their extreme territorial behavior, yet they allowed Elena to examine their offspring with the trust of a species that had never known fear. "The behavioral modifications are systematic," Velinara observed, her scientific training warring with the emotional impact of what she was witnessing. "Every species shows decreased aggression, increased social bonding, and enhanced cognitive function. It's as if their very nature has been ... transformed." Elena's work with each species demonstrated a level of understanding that surpassed anything in the collective xenobiological archives. She knew which plants each creature preferred, which sounds soothed them, which gestures conveyed safety and affection. Her movements were those of someone who had spent years learning not just to coexist with these beings, but to communicate with them on a level that transcended language. A thunderous roar echoed through the clearing, causing several of the smaller creatures to look up with interest rather than fear. The observer's instruments detected the approach of something massive, something that made their previous encounter with the thorned Leviathan seem almost mundane. "By the eternal void," Sethvar whispered, his composed demeanor finally cracking. "It's a Titan world shaper." The creature that emerged from the tree line defied description. Standing nearly 20 meters tall, its body was a fusion of organic and mineral components, as if the planet itself had achieved consciousness. Crystalline growths jutted from its rocky hide, while veins of luminescent fluid pulsed through its translucent sections like a living galaxy. World shapers were considered apex beings, creatures whose very presence could alter local ecosystems. They were living forces of nature, as far beyond the comprehension of lesser species as stars were beyond insects. The collective had never successfully studied one, as they seemed to exist in a state of constant movement across the planet's surface. Yet this one knelt before Elena with the reverence of a supplicant approaching a deity. Its massive head, crowned with crystals that caught and reflected the forest's light, lowered until it was level with the tiny human. Elena placed her hands on its mineral-smooth surface, and the creature's internal light pulsed in response, creating a display that was both beautiful and deeply alien. "How?" Kyrathon asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How is this possible?" Elena began to sing, her voice joining with the world shaper's deep harmonic resonance. The other creatures in the clearing added their own voices, creating a symphony that seemed to resonate through the very fabric of the forest. The observer's instruments detected ecological changes spreading outward from the clearing plants growing faster. Water running clearer, the air itself seeming to pulse with renewed vitality. She's not just caring for individual creatures, Valinara realized, her young mind grasping implications that her elders struggled to accept. She's healing the entire ecosystem. The planet itself is responding to her presence. The realization struck the observers with the force of revelation. Elena wasn't just a xenobiologist studying alien life. She was a bridge between worlds, a translator of souls who had achieved something the collective had deemed impossible. She had proven that the barriers between species were not walls, but doorways waiting to be opened by those brave enough to step through. As the day's feeding concluded and the creatures began to disperse, Elena remained in the clearing, her face turned toward the canopy with an expression of profound peace. The observers watched in silent awe, knowing they had witnessed something that would change not just their mission, but their understanding of what it meant to be truly alive. Asterisk. The revelation of Elena's sanctuary had transformed the observation post from a center of scientific detachment into something approaching a shrine. Valinara found herself spending her off-duty hours reviewing recordings of Elena's interactions, searching for the subtle techniques that allowed such unprecedented interspecies communication. Tyrathon had begun questioning decades of established xenobiological theory, her analytical mind rewriting fundamental assumptions about consciousness and connection. Even Zethver, whose career had been built on the rigid classification of species behaviors, found himself drawn to the screens with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The human they had dismissed as a primitive colonist had achieved something the collective's most advanced scientists had deemed impossible. Day 863 of observation, Zethver dictated, his usual professional tone replaced by something approaching wonder. Subject continues to demonstrate unprecedented levels of interspecies communication. Previous behavioral models require complete revision. Their expanded surveillance network had revealed the true scope of Elena's work. Hidden clearings throughout the Thornwood served as meeting points for creatures that should have been natural enemies. Under Elena's guidance, razor wolves hunted alongside crystalback stalkers, their natural antagonism replaced by cooperative behavior that defied evolutionary programming. But it was Elena's newest project that had captured the observer's complete attention. Deep within the forest's heart, she had discovered something that challenged the very nature of life on Kepler 442b, creatures so alien that their instruments struggled to classify it as living matter. The readings are unprecedented, Kirathon reported, her 6 arms dancing across multiple control surfaces as she tried to process the data. It's composed of both organic and quantum components, existing in a state of constant phase transition. Our closest equivalent would be a living manifestation of space-time itself. The entity defied conventional description. It appeared as a shifting mass of translucent flesh, interwoven with streams of starlight, its form constantly flowing between states of matter. When it moved, reality seemed to bend around it, creating ripples in the fabric of space that made the observer's instruments register readings that should have been impossible. Elena approached this cosmic anomaly with the same gentle confidence she had shown every other creature. The entity's response was immediate and profound, its chaotic form stabilized, the wild fluctuations in its quantum signature settling into something approaching harmony. The quantum resonance is synchronizing with her neural patterns, Valinara observed, her voice filled with awe. She's not just communicating with it. She's helping it maintain coherence in our reality. The entity's gratitude was palpable, expressed through cascades of light that painted the forest in colors that had no names. Elena sat beside it, her small hand resting on its ever-shifting surface, and began to sing the same wordless melody that had soothed the thorned Leviathan. As her voice rose through the clearing, something extraordinary happened. The entity's form began to stabilize further, its chaotic energy patterns organizing into something that resembled communication. Through their instruments, the observers detected complex information streams flowing between Elena and the cosmic, being not language as they understood it, but direct transfer of consciousness, emotion, and meaning. Commander, Kyrathon's voice carried a tremor of realization. I don't think we're just observing interspecies communication. We're witnessing the birth of a new form of consciousness altogether. The implications were staggering. Elena hadn't just tamed alien creatures. She had helped them transcend their evolutionary limitations. The razor wolves showed enhanced problem-solving abilities. The crystalback stalkers had developed rudimentary tool use. The world shaper was actively reshaping the ecosystem to support greater biodiversity. But even more profound was what Elena was becoming. Extended exposure to the quantum entity had begun to alter her own neural patterns. The observers detected changes in her brain structure that suggested she was developing new forms of perception, new ways of processing reality that went beyond human limitations. She's evolving, Thelanara whispered, her young mind grasping the magnitude of what they were witnessing. All of them are evolving, together. The realization struck them with the force of prophecy. Elena's sanctuary wasn't just a collection of tamed creatures. It was a laboratory for consciousness itself, a place where the boundaries between species were dissolving to create something entirely new. As if responding to their thoughts, the quantum entity's form pulsed with sudden intensity. Its attention, vast and alien, turned toward the observation post with the weight of a star's gaze. Alana's head lifted, her eyes following the entity's focus until she was looking directly at their hidden location. By the eternal void, Zethvar breathed, his confidence finally cracking completely. She knows we're here. Elena smiled, expression of such knowing warmth that it reached across the gulf between species and technology to touch something deep within each observer. She raised her hand in a gesture that could only be interpreted as invitation, her lips moving in words that their instruments couldn't capture, but their hearts somehow understood. The quantum entity's form shifted, reality bending around it as it prepared to do something that would change the course of history. The observers realized with growing excitement and terror that their role as hidden watchers was about to end. They were about to become part of the very phenomenon they had been studying, drawn into Elena's expanding circle of consciousness by forces beyond their comprehension. The choice was no longer whether to observe or interfere. It was whether to embrace transformation or flee from the greatest discovery in the history of the collective. As Elena's invitation hung in the air like a promise of impossible futures, the three observers faced a decision that would echo through the stars themselves. The watchers had become the watched, and the universe would never be the same. Part 5. The Bridge. Between worlds, the quantum entity's influence rippled through spacetime, itself dismantling the observation post's cloaking fields with the gentle inevitability of dawn. For the first time in 863 days, the collective observers stood exposed beneath Kepler 442b's twin suns, their advanced technology rendered transparent by forces that transcended conventional physics. Elena emerged from the forest with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to move in harmony with the natural world. Behind her came a procession that would have been impossible in any other context. Creatures that should have been mortal enemies, walking together in perfect synchronization. The thorned Leviathan's massive form cast shadows over razor wolves and crystalback stalkers, while the world shaper's crystalline structure caught and reflected the light of smaller bioluminescent creatures. First contact protocol, Zethvar whispered, his training finally reasserting itself despite the unprecedented circumstances. We maintain diplomatic positioning, and no, Eleonora interrupted, her young voice carrying surprising authority. "Don't you see? The first contact happened months ago. We've been watching it this entire time." Elena approached the three aliens with the same calm confidence she had shown every other species. Her eyes, the observers noticed, held depths that hadn't been there at the beginning of their surveillance, as if her extended communion with the quantum entity had given her access to dimensions of perception beyond normal human capacity. "Hello," she said simply, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated with their own neural frequencies. "I've been waiting for you to be ready." Kyrathon's analytical mind struggled to process the implications. Ready for what? How did you know? We were observing? Elena's smile held the warmth of someone greeting old friends. A forest told me. The quantum entity told me. But mostly, you told me yourselves. She gestured to the creatures surrounding her. Every species here was once like you, watching from a distance, afraid to bridge the gap between self and other. But connection is the fundamental force of the universe. It finds a way. The quantum entity flowed forward, its form stabilizing, into something that approached conventional matter while retaining its ethereal beauty. Through their instruments, the observers detected complex mathematical structures underlying its existence equations that described the intersection of consciousness and reality itself. "It's not just alive," Elena explained, her hand resting on the entity's shifting surface. "It's a living manifestation of the connections between all things." It helped me understand that the barriers we perceive between species are illusions created by fear and misunderstanding. Eleonora stepped forward, her natural curiosity overcoming her scientific training. "But the behavioral patterns, the evolutionary programming, how did you override millions of years of instinct?" "I didn't override anything," Elena replied gently. "I simply offered an alternative. Every creature here made the choice to evolve, to become more than what they were. The capacity for growth, for connection, for love, it exists in all conscious beings. It just needs someone willing to nurture it." The world shaper's massive form shifted, its crystalline structures resonating with harmonic frequencies that the observers felt in their bones. Through the quantum entity's translation, they began to understand the creature's perspective, a consciousness vast and ancient, awakening to new possibilities through contact with Elena's infinite compassion. The reports to the collective, Zethvar began, his voice heavy with the weight of revelation. "Everything we've documented, every assumption we've made about human nature, was based on fear," Elena finished. "You saw what you expected to see because you were looking from a place of separation. But consciousness recognizes consciousness, regardless of the form it takes. The collective has been studying the universe from the outside, when the only way to truly understand it is to become part of it." The quantum entity pulsed with approval, its form expanding to encompass the entire gathering. Through its influence, the observers began to experience reality from Elena's perspective, feeling the emotional resonance of every creature present, understanding the web of connections that bound all living things together. Kyrathon's 6 arms trembled as she processed sensations that her species had never experienced. The neural resonance. It's like being connected to every conscious being simultaneously. How do you maintain individual identity within such unity? By understanding that individual identity and universal connection aren't opposites, Elena explained. They're complementary aspects of the same truth. The more deeply you connect with others, the more fully you become yourself. The thorned Leviathan approached the observers with the same gentle curiosity it had shown Elena, its massive presence somehow comforting rather than threatening. Through the quantum entity's translation, they felt its thoughts ancient, wise, and filled with a patience that spanned geological epochs. It wants to know if you're ready to stop watching and start participating. Elena translated, though the observers were beginning to understand the creature's communications directly. The universe is vast and full of wonders, but it's also lonely, Every conscious being you've cataloged from a distance is waiting for someone brave enough to say hello. Valinara reached out with trembling fingers, touching the Leviathan's armored hide. The contact sent waves of sensation through her neural network, not pain or fear, but recognition, acceptance, and something that could only be described as joy. The great creature's ancient wisdom flowed through her, showing her perspectives that spanned millions of years and countless star systems. The data we've collected, Sethver said, his voice thick with emotion as he experienced the same connection. It's all wrong. Not factually, but fundamentally. We've been treating consciousness as an object to be studied rather than a miracle, to be celebrated. Elena nodded, her expression filled with understanding. The collective sent you here to study humanity, but you've discovered something much more important. You've found proof that consciousness is the universe's way of knowing itself, and that every barrier between species is just an invitation to grow. The quantum entity's form expanded further, its influence touching every living thing in the surrounding forest. Through its vast network, the observers felt the pulse of an entire ecosystem awakening to new possibilities. Plants reaching toward each other with newfound awareness. Insects communicating in languages that transcended chemical signals. The very planet itself beginning to dream. Will you help us? Elena asked, her question directed not just at the three observers, but at the entire collective they represented. Will you help us build bridges between worlds, between species, between the countless forms of consciousness that populate the universe? The choice hung in the air like a promise of infinite tomorrows. The observers could return to their sterile laboratories and file reports that would be dismissed as observational errors. Or they could embrace the truth that consciousness was not a phenomenon to be studied, but a gift to be shared. As the quantum entity's influence washed over them, carrying with it the combined wisdom of every species in Elena's sanctuary. They, three observers, felt the last barriers between themselves and the universe begin to dissolve. They were no longer watchers documenting the behavior of primitive beings. They were participants in the greatest adventure of all, the endless journey of consciousness discovering itself through connection with others. The bond beyond worlds had claimed them, and the universe itself smiled at the reunion of long separated family. In the days that followed, as word of their discovery spread through the collective's vast network, countless species would face the same choice. The age of separation was ending, and the age of connection had begun. In the forests of Kepler 442b, where a human xenobiologist had first offered her hand to a wounded beast, the future of consciousness itself was being written, and it was more beautiful than anyone had dared to dream. Asterisk.